Hi, this is Karen Jacobson with the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center. Today is Thursday, May 17th. Welcome to those of you who've been able to join us today for our public training with a focus on EMS Agency Information and the NEMSIS version 3 standard. So the objectives today that we wanted to talk about is the items that you see listed here. We wanted to discuss the EMS Agency Information that's available in the NEMSIS version 3 standard. Want to talk about how EMS agencies can discover how this information, what we refer to as the demographic information, is or can be used, so how it's used or could be used at the local EMS agency level, the state level, and the national level. And then we also wanted to at least make you guys aware, if some of you are not familiar, that there will be national benchmarking tools in which your agency can pull data. And Joshua Legler is also with the NEMSIS TAC, and I might ask Josh to flush some information out for me at the end, so because he's been working on that. So I'll have him add a little bit to the end of when we get to that point.
I'd be happy to help out.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. All right, so I want to start with some basic information, if I can, which is to have a quick little discussion with everybody on the call to see, what your perspective is about what EMS agency is. And then how it applies to NEMSIS. So let's start real quick and with a little conversation about what is EMS Agency Information. So does anyone here have a perspective on what it might be and what it is?
It's like the metadata for the agency, the demographics for the agency, right? Is that what you're looking for? Yeah,
exactly. So there's sometimes a little bit of a question about what it is, what it could be, and just how it would be used. And so then the question in how does it apply to NEMSIS would be that you as an EMS agency, long before NEMSIS existed, already had agency information, right? And then NEMSIS came along. And what's happened then with NEMSIS is we've worked with the EMS industry to say, all right, now that we have this standard for data collection, we're going to make sure that it has information that helps describe the EMS agency. So with the release of version 3, just a handful of years ago, we added a lot of elements that are focused specifically on the EMS agency. And we just did have a comment posted in here as well that reads, from Steve, that says, as a trauma registrar, we use the run sheets for injury information, vitals, trauma criteria, etc. Yeah, good point. Good point, Steve. Thanks for sharing that information. I think it's a valid one. In NEMSIS, so let's talk a little bit about this. And I'd like to ask a couple of folks from, or at least we'll reference it here as we get going. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit is let's just knowing information about your EMS agency, how you might have used that yourself in the past, kind of a pre-NEMSIS, pre-having an electronic patient care reporting system or an EMS a data collection system, because that information isn't specific to your EMS response activation where you then have patient contact. There's information as it relates specifically to the EMS agency that's always been captured. So then I wanted to flush this out a little bit more about, so EMS agency information, what is it? So here's just a couple of little bits and pieces of information. We do have specific elements, but in general, it's information that describes the EMS agency. such as level of service licensed by the state and type of equipment used and personnel, and you'll see that I'll have some of that information before. But as you see here where we talk about level of service licensed by the state. So how many of you are EMS agency, are with an EMS agency as opposed to state systems or trauma registrars? How many of you directly work for an EMS agency? Anybody? Well, then let me turn that a little bit and ask some of the state data managers or state EMS office representatives or NEMSIS. Barbara, I'm going to pick on you a little bit here. How many of you know or can talk a little bit about information that you as a state or a licensing organization, how many of you have information that you've always requested from agencies when they are licensed?
That happens for us in San Diego, yes. We're the regulatory agency, so we have all the information as, on the agency so that we regulate what level they are, what equipment they have, et cetera.
Right, okay. Yep, so that's pretty much was what I was getting at, is that this is information that's always been captured, right? Long ago, it was information that was filled out in a paper form, provided to a state system, and one of the things that has happened with NEMSIS is that it has grown and become a standard that can be utilized to share information more cleanly in a standardized mechanism of passing that data back and forth between an EMS agency's electronic EMS data collection system to a state system. Now, that can be used at a data level, but it could also be used in a licensure type of database. So then my next question was, well, how does it apply to NEMSIS? Well, most of you who are on this call are already aware that we have elements in the NEMSIS standard that start with an E or start with a D. Well, the EMS agency informations are elements that are referred to as the DEM data set or demographic data set describing the EMS agencies, and we refer to those as the D elements. At a national level, we have elements that are a subset, and they're only elements that are part of the D agency section and the D configuration section. So here what you see is a list of just a screenshot, and I'm going to pull up the NEMSIS online data dictionary here, and then I'm going to pull this back out so I can pull it back in from my other screen. But within the NEMSIS standard, and how many of you do not know how to access the NEMSIS online data dictionary? Anybody not know how to get to this? Okay, great. Well, as you know, we have a bunch of information within the data dictionary, and we have the two data sets, the DEM data set and the EMS data set. The DEM data set is what describes the EMS agency. So here are just some general sections as it relates to those sections. So we have the DEM data set, and we have all of these pieces of information, and this is where we have worked with the stakeholders across the nation to start the process of saying, well, what information do we need? So as you know, we have all of these elements, and I also have an Excel spreadsheet up, but I might, probably going to pull that over a little bit too to talk about this information. So there's these various pieces of information as it relates to the demographic data set that describes the EMS agency. Some of this information is data that is important for a state to have, as well as for a local EMS agency to have, or be able to compile from your own data collection system. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pop over here really briefly. Oops, looks like I've been clicking on a couple of things here. So what I wanted to talk about really briefly again here is how does it apply to NEMSIS? So NEMSIS has the national subset. So over here I talked about that of these sections within the demographic data set that describes, in theory, all of the information for an EMS agency, there's only 2 sections of which there are national elements, and those are D-agency and D-configuration. And then I have 2 slides that kind of break down the elements within the D-agency section and the D-configuration section. And just so you know, what I've highlighted here is what's in with italics are the elements that will allow what we refer to as a not value, right? Whereas those that are not italicized are mandatory elements. And most of you who are joining the call today are familiar with these elements, but I just wanted to point them out as well as talk about how elements can be used at a local and state level and how this information is important. So that's how this came to be, right, is to say, all right, let's continue to grow this thing called NEMSIS, and we increased it a little bit more with version 3 from what existed with version 2. So if I click on the overview and summary page of the online data dictionary, there's always been this comparison between version 2 and version 3. And in version 2, we had 110 elements, and what we did is we added a number of elements in version 3. And we retired some as well. So they've existed, but we've enhanced them and grown them a little bit based on stakeholder input. All right, so what I want to do here is talk a little bit about the local use of the demographic information. So how many of you directly enter, like personnel information and vehicle information and facility information into your electronic patient care reporting systems at an agency level? Do you know, and for those of you who are not EMS agencies yourselves, how many of you are aware of, and I'll just say your EMS agencies that you may regulate, how many of you are aware of whether your EMS agencies are doing that within their own NEMSIS compliant software products or using your state or regional product? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start I'm going to talk about some of these pieces of information. I'm going to click on all of them actually a little bit. But what I want to do is I'm going to start with D personnel, and then I'm going to come back up to D agency and D configuration and talk about those a little bit. Now, some of these are pretty obvious, right? That you can say, if we're using, or an EMS agency at a local level, they can use this as an HR system, a human resources system, if they want, if they don't have one themselves. So as elements were added in version 3, or even version 2, a lot of the focus has been, let's have a tool that EMS agencies across the nation can utilize to their benefit. And so what exists in here is literally the option to capture as much information as possible as it relates to personnel. Now, those personnel may or may not be certified clinicians, EMS clinicians. But all of this information can be entered. Information that's very important for state systems, for example, is identifying if they are clinicians, what the state of licensure is, what the state license or certification ID number is, what the certification or licensure level is. So, whether they're a paramedic, an AEMT, a first responder, a critical care or community level paramedic. So all of this information can be entered into the EPCR system. This information, based on the product that's in use, can flag information in it for you, letting you know when people's certification levels might be expiring, and there's a lot of functionality that software companies have developed into their systems to help with maintenance of certifications. So that's how depersonnel information can be utilized within the systems. Most software products that I've seen in the past is that the information that's entered in depersonnel will also feed the information that's in the eCrew section. And then also it's usually driven by the licensure ID number, and that information can also pull over into the e-medications and e-procedures section in order to identify who is administering certain medications or performing procedures on patients that may require some level of care and assessment. Right? Makes sense. Anything not make sense so far?
All good.
Awesome, thanks. So as it relates to, from depersonnel, we talk about personnel, then another key piece is tracking your vehicles. So there's a lot of information that's in here describing vehicles and how those vehicles may be staffed or stocked. So this is some information that was added in version 3 that may or may not be used, but one of the things that has been identified is that information that could be valuable to an EMS agency to track how that vehicle is utilized could be very important for you at the EMS agency level and then also at a state level. So every single vehicle, so when, and most of you know this already, you're in your systems, as vehicle information is entered, the VIN is going to be the true identifier to a unique vehicle, but a vehicle will usually have a vehicle identifier that's not specific to the manufacturer, but assigned by the EMS agency or potentially the licensing body. There are some states that do provide a permit, for example, to a vehicle, and that permit number is usually assigned, for example, as a unit vehicle number. So vehicles that have to be licensed, on an annual or every 2-year basis, that information can be listed somewhere here. So that information again can be tracked about about that level of detail. And then an EMS unit call sign. So each vehicle can have all of this type of information documented. And it's usually a one-time setup, right? So you get that information, you enter it in, the EMS agency enters it into their product. Again, whether it's used at the local level or it's a regional system or a state system that's hosting it and an EMS agency is using it. But this information can be entered right away and before patient care report is ever documented. And a lot of this information, again, can feed from the demographic information describing the EMS agency or the vehicles or the personnel and feed that EMS or patient care report response documentation. So D-facility, and there's a lot of states that are providing information to you about what type of facilities and what the location codes are for the facilities so that everybody is using a consistent coding structure. So if I have my own hospital, right, so if it's Jacobson Hospital, you'd want to make sure that the code Jacobson Hospital is documented in that EMS data collection system. and so that information is tracked in your system and sent correctly to a state when it's actually being documented in that patient care response. But the value at an agency level to enter facility information is an EMS agency is then able to limit the type of facilities, the name of the facilities with the address information. And again, this information can feed directly into your EMS data collection system and those electronic patient care reports. So it's very helpful in limiting the type of information that is going to be used at an EMS agency level. So this is also true for delocation. A lot of EMS agencies will have a station in which their vehicles are housed, especially larger systems, or for systems as well. You know, a crew starts, and then they'll go have a posting location as you look at what the call volume is. And so the EMS location group, this is simply used to help identify where an EMS agency may be responding from. So then those data points can be used and tracked over time to see, you know, what the best location is to have vehicles responding to your service area. The D-device section is information that was created so that EMS agencies could track any equipment that might be used. And so this is just a very high-level information, but as many pieces of equipment can be identified and tracked within this section of a product line. There's also some D-contact information that describes individuals within the EMS agency. You can see that the state data managers council identified a number of elements as generally nice to have information as it relates to leadership. Usually is what this amounts to, is agency contact type is some management folks within an EMS agency. So now I'm going to come back to the PowerPoint, and then I'm going to jump back over here. So D-agency and deconfiguration, and then this is actually going to touch all levels, the local use, the state use, and the national use. Also important at the state use is D-agency and deconfiguration, but also D-personnel, D-vehicle. This is information that states want to know as well. As I said, there are many states that provide permit information for a vehicle, and that information can then be tracked in there and be transferred over. There are a number of states who do require that a demographic file be submitted before the patient care report information can ever be submitted. I know the state of Oregon requires that, state of California. I'm trying to think who else does. There are other systems that say we want you to go and enter that information in the state system, but may also be in a position to say, oh, if you have that, yes, please send it to us. So at minimum, it's the national elements, which include D-agency and deconfiguration. But how that's used by a state is going to vary, but it's important for them, especially if they want to use that information as either as a comparative tool for their licensure system, but what they're also able to do is pull that information and do some reporting themselves on, you know, what their agency configurations are. And I'm going to talk about that here again in a moment. So what I wanted to do is pull some information as it relates here to D-agency and deconfiguration. So I'm going to go into a little depth into de-agency and deconfiguration both, but as you see here, indicate in the deconfiguration section that there may be state laws across the nation that limit the medications that are administered or procedures performed by certification level. And this is information that a state may provide via a state data set tool. And I am going to go to show you an example of that. And since Josh Legler is on this call, I am going to go to Oregon just to show some information as it relates to what Oregon has provided, and then demonstrate to you a little bit about how an EMS agency can set this similar information up as well. So we're trying to get information from states to help software companies pull this information in. So Oregon has been kind enough to indicate the certification and licensure levels that they recognize within the state. There's 13 of them. But then what they've done is they've gone one step further, and there's medications permitted by the state, and it's by certification level. And so what they have done is they've provided some information. So this medication list comes from NEMSIS, and it's part of our medication suggested list. And then you see these certification levels. There's a little, it's very subtle, but there's a little drop-down gray arrow here. If you click on that, it orders this by the certification level. So you can see in Oregon, the EMR, the emergency medical responder, is allowed to administer aspirin, epi 1 milligram per mil. So this is an EpiPen, in essence, as you see here. So here are some more. So this is epi 1 to 1,000, used for allergic reactions. Glucose, oral gel, naloxone, and again, these two EpiPens, and oxygen. And so what a software company, so I'm just going to click on these. You can just see how this changes and literally what someone is going to do in here, what a state is doing and providing information. A software company can grab this information and can utilize this to populate for their clients operating in this case, Oregon or other states that have done something similar. But what they're able to do is then utilize this information. I'm going to jump over here to deconfiguration. Because what we have is we have within the deconfiguration section, we talk about certification licensure levels, and then we have these groups that are called EMS certification levels permitted to perform each procedure and the EMS agency procedures. Now, we do have these two elements of medications and procedures list off the certification levels. And then the medications, however, or the procedures, those are following currently, the NEMSIS standard. So for procedures, that's SNOMED CT. For medications, that's RX norm. I'm going to jump back to this Oregon page and show you that what's being displayed here is the RX norm descriptor and then the code. So literally, you're able to see within your own systems, your software system, you might see in the service setup what the purpose of this is, and I'm going to go back to the grouping page, but the whole purpose of this is to help your crew members limit and prevent errors in documentation. So, for example, if you do have AEMTs and they're limited to 10 medications, if the information is set up within your deconfiguration section that describes your EMS agency, then that will again feed down to your patient care report system so that you would get a little warning if for example, an AEMT or an EMT were trying to administer morphine, I'd probably get a little warning within your software system that says that certification level is not allowed to administer that medication. But this is really important information that should be set up within your system. in order to improve your own documentation and, again, limit some errors. So let me talk about all of these real briefly. So deconfiguration 01 is the state associated with the certification levels. So the purpose of this, and you'll notice that this has a one-to-many, this whole group. So there might be EMS agencies that are located on the border of two states and are licensed in both states. And so a software product would have the ability to indicate each state separately about, or in California or other states, there are certain counties or regions that allow certain levels of care that might differ from their neighbor. So literally each state is listed in here. You would list your state. You'd identify the certification or licensure levels that a state has. This is mandatory information. But if you as an EMS agency only have 2 or 3 types of certification levels that your agency staffs, you could limit it to that type of information for yourself. We have procedures permitted by the state, medications permitted by the state, and protocols permitted by the state. And if you haven't noticed this before, we do have some a little bit of guidance in here, and so this is just some recommendation to use one of the not values if you're submitting that information to the state, because the state is going to have a larger list as we saw with Oregon. There are some states that do have statewide protocols. For those states that do have statewide protocols, they'll be able to identify which of these protocols that they recognize in their system, and then there's a corresponding section that says EMS agency protocols. So if the state does not have protocols, EMS agencies do, so that information can be documented. One of the things that we've talked about a little bit at the national level is how information that is mandatory could be documented. So we've talked about some, if an agency has not entered this information in their system, this is information that's important at a national level. We understand that there has been some concerns about the descriptors that are used here. And I'd say probably 10 years ago, the State Medical Directors Council are the ones who created the initial list of protocols. And so what was done was an attempt to identify primary areas of care that would be utilized the most across the nation. So that's what this list represents. And I will just point out that if someone had a question about what should be documented, my recommendation is to, and of course now I'm not finding it, is that everyone would at minimum use general universal patient care, initial patient contact as a standard EMS agency protocol, as at least one to be documented in there. We also have deconfiguration 11, EMS agency specialty service capability. This was a new element with version 3 as compared to version 2. The whole purpose of this element was to get a better understanding of what EMS agencies are trained for, to see what type of specialty services are offered across the nation. And just as a reminder, there is a value of none in the system, and this is it's a one-to-many, so it's a multi-select element, which allows an EMS agency to indicate as many levels of capability as they offer to their community. We also have billing status. So this is an element that existed in version 2. This is not a national element, but it is something that some software systems are asking that be documented in order to provide some information. I think it helps with billing exports and so on. There's 2 elements in deconfiguration that are related to whether or not emergency medical dispatch is offered. So one element is a national element, the other is not. So one is just a question of, does the dispatch center for an EMS agency offer emergency medical dispatch? This is a mandatory element. And most EMS agencies should know this information. So they would know whether or not EMD is literally offered in their dispatch centers. And so it's a one-time fill it out and have that information available. Patient monitoring capabilities. This is another new element within version 3. And the intent with this element is to identify the types of care that are available at for the patient. This is a mandatory element. Right now, we are recommending that folks do review this, but vital sign monitoring is something that everybody does. It does not mean it needs to be some type of ongoing automatic monitoring. It just means you know how to take a pulse, a blood pressure, count respirations, and so on. Crew call sign. This is information that is documented on patient care reports. It's mandatory in both the demographic data set and in the EMS data set as part of the NEMSIS standard. And so crew call sign is a free text field. Again, it's a mandatory element. It was required as well, mandatory in the version 2 standard in the EMS data set side. But in here, we're just looking to learn what the crew call signs are. We don't use them per se. What we've done is we've linked them in essence in order to say, did we get that information in the demographic file, and is it coming over in the EMS dataset file? All we do is use it for identifying a unique record in the EMS dataset section. We have a number of elements that we tie together to identify a unique patient care report. It's a lot of information on deconfiguration, and I haven't even talked about de-agency, so I'm going to hit that one really quick. This one, again, we have lots and lots of elements in here. What we just point out really quickly is we again have elements that are mandatory, and we have elements that are required at the national level. As you can see, anything that has an N are national elements, and almost every element within the de-agency section is also a national element. We know that there have been some challenges getting actual census tract information or EMS agency zip code information. These two do allow for not values. Those that do that are required to have something in them, though, are the state that the EMS agency operates in and the county. So we've heard that there are some a little bit of problems entering the county information, and I think it's just because people may not be aware of where this information should be documented within their NEMSIS compliant software product, but that information is important. So just as, primary type of service, one of the things that we're looking to do is find out, well, what types of agencies are providing 911 response with transport capability and without transport capability. This information is going to be really key, and we'll talk, I'm going to have Josh talk about that here in a moment. But this is information that folks are able to say, my agency, and to do some national benchmarking is, I'm a 911 response agency without transport capability, or as opposed to one with transport capability. We have the same choices but for other types of service, but then level of service, in essence, is how the agency is licensed. Are they licensed as an ALS or a BLS agency? What level of care can they provide? Organization status is whether an agency is mixed. Mixed is being a volunteer and paid. Non-volunteer does mean paid. This is elements that existed in version 2. Just in case people aren't aware, organizational type and EMS agency organization tax status. These kind of were a split between what we had in organizational type in version 2. So this element existed in version 2, but we had some of these saying for-profit and non-profit. So with version 3, we separated these into 2 separate elements in order to, provide some clarity. But both of these end up being national mandatory elements. Some of these, again, are that are elements in here are important for you as an agency, and then at a national level to get an FDID number, the National Provider Identifier. It's usually important to document daylight savings time within your software system. I think there's a lot of software products, if daylight savings time use is documented, that software will automatically make that change at that point in time of the year when we go on and off daylight savings time. Statistical calendar year information, this is important, and I'm going to have Josh talk about that here in a moment. But this statistical calendar year information, we need to know the year. And what we always want to be able to do is capturing some general information with regards to the call volume or the service area that an EMS agency is providing service to. The whole reason for this is the benchmarking picture. We want to be able to use it for research, but we also want to, in essence, empower you, states, EMS agencies, and the software companies in order to pull national aggregate data back where we know what's the service area size, what's your population, call volume, and speed of response is, or length of response time is going to differ based on population, based on service area size. But what you'll see here is we have some information as it relates to patient contact volume and patient transport volume versus overall annual call volume, dispatch volume, or call center volume. So what I'm going to do, I wanted to pull this out. So I've jumped, as I was going through those, I've kind of, oh, look, I quit typing. I've talked about most of these things as I went through here, but I wanted to talk really quick now and ask for Josh's help with this now is, at a national level, what we're doing with the EMS agency information is being able to do some research. But how many of you heard of EMS Compass? Everybody's waving their hand, right?
Of course.
Yep. So I do want to point out that the Compass website, it went offline before, but it is actually, most of the information is now available simply on the Association of State EMS Officials website. So if you had some questions about EMS Compass and you haven't seen that in a while, literally the information is out here. You can reference different pieces of information as it relates to Compass. But one of the things that NEMSIS is doing is we're creating an API, a web service tool, so that software companies will be able to pull data. And some of the data that they're going to be able to pull is based on the measures, but they're going to be able to pull, request the data based on the type of agency. So Josh, I'm going to pull this over just so I can have some of these measures in here. But can you share a little more information on the type of information of data that will be available?
Sure. So the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center is implementing a service that will allow the public, so anybody, to do some analytical reporting on some of these measures that were developed through EMS Compass. Just to draw an example, we could look at a measure. In fact, if you want to search for it, Karen, it's trauma-01. Trauma-01 is a measure about whether or not a pain score was collected on trauma calls. So a fairly straightforward measure that basically says, hey, if you had a trauma patient, you should assess their level of pain. Wow, we go from stroke to trauma 04. Well, anyway, there was a trauma.
There it is.
Trauma-01. It's there. It's pain assessment for injured patients. So through a national portal on the NEMSIS website, once the project is finished, you, as just as a member of the public, would be able to utilize a dashboard on the NEMSIS website to say, great, give me that performance measure. What percentage of calls had a pain assessment when they were a trauma patient? And you could track that over time and see if EMS is getting better or worse at recording a pain scale for their trauma patients. But if you work in an EMS agency, you might really want to see the numbers for agencies that are similar to your agency. You might say, well, I work in a small rural agency. We're a volunteer agency, and we have 100 calls a year. I don't want to compare, and I can look at my own numbers in my EPCR system, but I don't want to compare my agency to just a big pile of national data. I don't want to compare my agency to urban paramedic agencies that are full-time paid staff with lots of training resources. I want to compare my agency to other agencies that are all volunteer, that have only 100 calls a year. So in this tool that we will provide, we will utilize the information that the agencies have provided in their demographic data in order to provide that categorization and the drill down ability in these EMS Compass measures. So for example, you'll be able to use organization status, and you'll be able to say, okay, that's great, I've got the numbers for pain measurement in trauma patients, but I want to know the numbers for volunteer agencies. You'll be able to do that because agencies have submitted their demographic data and have indicated whether they're a volunteer agency or a non-volunteer agency. Or you'll say, I want it by call volume. I want to look at those agencies that have between 50 and 300 calls per year, because that's where my agency is. And I want to see how I compare to those agencies. And so you'll be able to break it down by call volume. Well, that call volume comes from the agency demographic data, those annual statistics that Karen talked about. So agencies that give us nothing for their EMS patient contact volume per year, they'll show up in the null category. Just a big bucket of agencies that didn't tell us how many patients they have per year. The agencies that tell us what their call volume was in the previous year fall into one of those other ranges, and then at that point the data becomes valuable because we can compare agencies of similar size, similar volume to each other. So that's how the agency demographic data will be used very soon at the national level to facilitate the use of analysis on these EMS Compass performance measure benchmark tracking.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh.
Sure.
See, I get all excited just knowing that we're that close now to being able to offer these resources to folks. So we really wanted you to understand, everybody to understand exactly, what the purpose of the demographic data are at the local level, at the state level, as well as at the national level. So let me see. I want to double check to see who's on the who has joined us today to see if there's anybody who has some additional information they wanted to share with us as it relates to what they may be doing within their own system as it relates to demographic data. Josh, I know you also work with Oregon. Is Oregon doing anything specifically with the demographic data that you guys receive?
Well, I just wanted to mention that I think one of my, I'm going to hit the campaign trail, I think, this year to really send people the message that demographic data, in my opinion, is the key to data quality. In Oregon, we review the demographic data from agencies before we allow them to submit patient care report data. And we do that because we know that lots of problems with data quality that could show up in their PCR data, they would show up first in demographic data. And if we can fix it up front in the demographic data before they submit PCRs, then we get clean PCR data. So one example would be we check their facility list in demographics. So they tell us which facilities they transport to, and we automatically check that against the Oregon facility list that's been published in Oregon State Dataset. And if the name of the facility doesn't match up with our list, or the facility ID or the location of the facility doesn't match up, then we're able to flag that right up front. And they can change that in their software, get it all fixed, and then we know that 6 months or a year down the road, when they finally do a transport to that hospital that they rarely use, we know that the information about that hospital on that patient care report will be correct because we found the problem first in their demographic data. We didn't have to wait months down the road to try to discover the bad data after they had already submitted thousands of patient care reports. Same thing goes for their medication list and procedure list. We've seen lots of problems there where they're using perhaps obsolete codes or the codes that the state would not prefer to see submitted. So we check those. We see lots of problems in the personnel list. They may have people certified at old certification levels that the state no longer recognizes, or using certification numbers that don't match the pattern of the state's EMS license numbers. And we can find all of those problems first in demographics before they even submit the first PCR, and then have confidence that the PCRs will come in clean because they fixed it right up front in their agency configuration.
Thank you, Josh. I think that's a really key piece that I don't think we've only heard recently that is happening and just what the benefits of that are. So that's really great information, I think, to share. And I see that as you said, you're going to go on the campaign trail, but I think that'll be a really important kind of a learning lesson that folks can take to heart. So thank you, Josh. So what I wanted to do is just, because we only have a whopping 2 minutes left, I know you really wondered if we'd have things to talk about here. So, we're not showing you how you yourself can pull the national benchmarking statistics today, but as Josh said, that's coming down the pike. So there will be another, training session on that in the not too distant future with some, and a lot of it's going to be targeted as well to the software vendor community. But just so you know that that's coming and very soon, and you'll be able to do some comparative analysis. I just wanted to just say one thing as we talk about how data is used. We do have, and I had it open somewhere already, but I'll just go there again. On the NEMSIS website, under View Reports, we have public reports. And just as a reminder, we have some version 3 dashboards that already exist, and we have a STEMI dashboard as well as these other dashboards. So take a look at these and see what national public dashboards we currently have available to you. And then with the new web service tool where you're going to be able to pull data based on criteria, it's going to be an even stronger resource for you to do direct benchmarking, comparing your own data, whether it's a state or an agency or regional system of care, to the national data. But then my other question was, do people have questions?
None by me, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate it, and look forward to many of you participating again with us next month. All right. Be well, everybody.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks.